There seems to be a lot of confusion among supporters of the DPRK on how to address the two sides of the DMZ, with some thinking that saying North Korea or South Korea is taboo. But this is not the correct way to look at the issue. So in this video, I'm gonna try to clear the confusion behind this topic by giving some background information and putting it all into context. To help you guys better understand the situation, I'll first have to talk about the name of Korea itself. Korea has been called various different names throughout its history by Koreans, and the word Korea used by Westerners is in fact derived from the name of one of its past kingdoms, namely Goryeo. This is similar to how the word China is derived from the Qin dynasty, whereas Chinese people refer to China as Zhongguo. One of the major dynasties in Korean history is the Joseon dynasty, which lasted for about 5 centuries. The name Joseon is the name for Korea used by the North today, and in Korean, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is called 조선민주주의인민공화국. Joseon is Korea, 민주주의 means democratic or the ideology of democracy, 인민 is the people, and 공화국 is republic. Put together, it translates to the Democratic People's Republic of Joseon or Korea. Now we're gonna go back to 1897 when the Korean Empire was proclaimed. The name of the Korean Empire in Korean is 대한제국. Daehan is translated to Korea, and it's itself a reference to a past historical period in Korea, and Taeguk is empire. 대한제국 can be abbreviated to Hanguk, which means the state or kingdom of Han, but then in English it's just Korea. So, what does this Han mean? Let's get into that a little bit. There was a time when there were 3 kingdoms that existed simultaneously on the Korean peninsula, and that period is referred to as Samhan, which means 3 Han. There have been suggestions that Han in this case is a derivation of the Mongolian word Khan, which means ruler, like as in Genghis Khan, or the Manchurian word for Han, which means the same thing. Anyways, the Daehan in 대한제국 means Great Han, or Big Han. So why is it great or big? Well, when there were 3 kingdoms, they all controlled smaller parts of the Korean peninsula. And when you add their territories together, they more or less make up the Korean peninsula, so that's what Daehan or Great Han, Big Han is a reference to. So why is all of this relevant? Because the government that calls itself the Republic of Korea in Korean is 대한민국, or the Republic of Daehan. And like 대한제국, it's also abbreviated to Hanguk. Fast forward to today. There are 2 governments in Korea, and they both use different names for Korea in Korean. Each government effectively administers one half of the country, with neither side recognizing the legitimacy of the other government. However, both sides do recognize the fact that they only administer one half of the peninsula. So, how do they refer to the half that's not under their control? Well, from the perspective of the North, the state of Joseon encompasses all of Korea, and the capital of Korea is in Pyongyang. When they say the DPRK, they mean all of Korea, with the understanding that Korea revolves around Pyongyang. So DPRK to them doesn't mean just North Korea. It means Korea, albeit a northern-focused Korea. When they talk about the South, they say Namjoseon, which means Southern Joseon. On the other hand, from the perspective of the South, the state of Hanguk also encompasses all of Korea, and the capital of Korea is in Seoul. When they speak of Hanguk or the ROK, they're talking about all of Korea, though with the understanding that Korea revolves around Seoul. So it's kind of like the reverse. It's one Korea with more emphasis on the South. When they talk specifically about the North, they say Bukhan, which means Northern Hanguk. So now you might wonder what happens when leaders from the 2 sides meet. Well, out of respect, both sides avoid referring to Korea by name, given that their Korean names carry political implications, unlike the word Korea. And instead they say things like 우리나라, which means our country. When speaking of the North and South, they'll say 북측 and 남측, which respectively mean North Side and South Side. President Kim Il-sung proposed reunification under a confederated system, under which the existing political systems on both sides would exist for a while, and this new state would neither be called Joseon nor would it be called Hanguk, but Goryeo. So when we look at these facts, we then realize that these intricacies don't exactly translate over into English in a readily understandable way. But if you take the time to read publications from both sides, you'll see how it's handled. For one, you'll never hear the South being referred to as 대한민국 or the ROK by the North. They'll refer to the geographic area as South Korea with a lowercase s. The government is called the South Korean government, or the South Korean puppet regime, the Southern puppets, etc., depending on the mood of the writer. Similarly, you won't find official South Korean publications referring to the North as the DPRK, but rather just North Korea, though the South does capitalize the S and N when speaking of North-South issues. This is why it's very odd when people say they support the DPRK, but then refer to South Korea as the ROK. And it's also very strange to hear supporters of the South Korean regime referring to the North as the DPRK. Both governments agree on one Korea, it's just they have different interpretations of what Korea is. Because of Western influence, however, Southern media outlets like Arirang News will use terms like the two Koreas in their English broadcasts, but this is something you'll never hear in the North. So where does the idea that we shouldn't say North Korea or South Korea come from? Well, it's true in some situations, but not others. It's all about context and implications. When speaking of nationality, there is only one Korean nation. There's no North Korean nationality or South Korean nationality. However, when speaking of things that are specific to one side, like say you're in the North and you want to talk about things that are specific to South Korean people, it's fine to call them South Koreans. The understanding is that they're Koreans and you're speaking about something that's specific to Southerners. If you want to speak of the two sides as geographic locations, there's also nothing wrong with that either. I've heard my northern tour guides ask someone in my tour group who has worked in South Korea what kind of foods are popular in South Korea among young people, for example. What's taboo, especially in the North, is to imply that there are two Koreas or that North Korea and South Korea aren't two halves of a single country under separate administration, but two countries altogether. So basically, don't talk about North Korea as if it's one country or South Korea as if it's another country. Don't say things like two Koreas, but instead just say the North and the South. Now, if you've read English articles from China, you'll notice that they'll refer to the two halves of Korea as the DPRK and the ROK. This was not always the case, but it became so in 1992 when the PRC established diplomatic relations with the southern authorities. When that happened, China could no longer refer to the south as Nanchaosian, or Chinese for Namjoseon or Southern Joseon. It had to refer to it as Hanguo or Dahanminguo, Chinese for Hanguk and Taemingguk, respectively. This is because China had to recognize the legitimacy of the southern government, at least on the southern half of the peninsula, in order to establish diplomatic ties. Translated into English, this would be the DPRK and the ROK. If you support the idea that the two halves of Korea are two separate countries, then this is appropriate, but if your position is that of the DPRK, then it's not. If you consider the government on the south to be an illegitimate puppet state, then you should not be calling it the ROK, and you should not refer to the geographic area under its control as the ROK, but rather just South Korea. Or when you speak about Korea, you can just say Korea and only specify North and South when people ask, and if it's relevant. Hopefully this short introduction clears up some of the confusion for everyone.